Thank you so much for those very kind words, generous words to introduce me. So, very good morning, and I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm going to rely on a few PowerPoint slides. Sometimes pictures tell a fuller, richer story, and but forgive me. At the IMF, they train us to work with numbers, and it's a difficult habit to break. So, I want to make, I don't know if the PowerPoint slide is, perfect. So I'm gonna make 3 propositions on the region's economy. At the start, I will start by saying kind of, forgive me, this is just a generalization to some degree. There's a lot of heterogeneity, a lot of differentiation across our countries. It's not lost on me, but I think the broader narrative still tells us about where we are and how things have developed in the recent past. So these 3 propositions. Voila. Okay. So 3 propositions. First is my first proposition is that much as we amplify just how difficult things are in Africa relative to other countries, I think it's important to not lose sight of the tremendous development progress the region has made over the last 30-35 years. This is important because it's only if we know where we've done well, what we've done good at, we know what the weaknesses are and how to fix those. Second proposition I'm going to make is that in recent years, since around 2020, there have been really seminal exogenous developments to the region that have complicated economic developments, economic outcomes, and are risking stalling development progress, maybe even reversing it in some cases. So something we have to, policymakers in the region have been working against and have to guard against going forward. Importantly, these recent developments, I think, mean that we are now looking at a very different global economic order. So going forward, we have to calibrate policies in that vein. The third one, I remain as ever optimistic. Nobody that works in our continent, in the region, cannot be optimistic. I always contrast the somber ways in which we talk about what happens in the region, etc. God knows some of it is warranted, but nothing fills me with confidence as being on the ground in the region and seeing just how much dynamism, how much creativity there is. And I'm 100% certain that this century will be ours. It's just a matter, demographically, that's absolutely guaranteed. It's a matter of making sure that economically too, we capture the front seat. So I'll try and say a little bit about that. So with that, just a few slides to tell the story that the development progress that we've seen in the region is very real. And I'm talking here about not the fact that we now have beautiful shiny buildings in our cities, better cars, mobile phones, but really in a very fundamental way, there has been a lot of development progress. There's 2 sets of statistics that I try to look at before going to a country to try and see, whether, as I think it was Dennis that said, economic policy at the end of the day is about improving people's lives. And so I try and look at kind of non-macroeconomic statistics. And typically I will look at how infant mortality, life expectancy, maternal mortality type indicators have improved, just to get a sense of how the policies have impacted in a very real way the outcomes that we want to foster. And then another one I look at is like some gauge of infrastructure investment or infrastructure development. So, the chart on the left shows life expectancy in my home country, Ethiopia, and the US. In the early 90s, life expectancy in my country was, in the mid-40s, 45, 46 years. In the US, it was, of course, about 70 years. That gap, if you fast forward to where we are now, that gap is closed substantially. And there are other countries that have done even better, are close to 70, 72 years life expectancy at birth right now, compared with about 75, 76. This is a very, very real, tangible improvement that has been made. Second, and much the same if you pick, indicators like infant mortality, etc., and compare across the region. Second point is, the second chart shows electricity coverage in Ghana. In the early 90s, I had the privilege to visit Accra and suffered the consequences of very, very brutal economic electricity outages. In January, I was back there and just wanted an update on where things are. I know developments have, of course, taken off there. And, from electricity coverage in the country has gone from 20-25% in the early 90s to about 92%. Again, a very, very real and tangible progress that has been made. I'm not making a judgment about whether this is sufficient. God knows no. There's so much poverty still in our region, and we have to be a lot more ambitious than these numbers would indicate. But it's really important to also note that the last 30, 35 years have been a period where there's been tremendous progress. And to my mind, what has facilitated that progress are a host of factors, a lot within our control, policymakers, Africans' control, and some that are a bit more exogenous. Specifically, I think the fact that we've moved from more autocratic single-party political dispensation to more boisterous democracies, I think has been a factor. It has made sure that people's needs are addressed rather than what leaders think are important. I think that has been important. Second, I think policy-making institutions, the quality has improved tremendously. Example that I like to give, of course, it's partly because it's people that I know a bit better, is central banks. The way central banks do their operations, honestly, in some cases, is just outstanding. I'll give you the example of the Bank of Uganda, which kept inflation at or below levels that we saw in advanced countries through the most recent global shock. The same thing in South Africa, the same thing in several other African countries. So just really, really excellent management of public institutions in many cases. And then third, and this is, I think, as important a factor, is that this technological progress has been facilitated by the fact that knowledge is easily transmitted, easily shared with the advent of the internet, etc. And whenever people come and tell me about that AI threatens, Africa is threatened to be left behind because of AI, etc. On the contrary, I think it's an incredibly powerful tool that equalizes knowledge diffusion and will actually help Africans catch up in a lot of dimensions. Example, will be familiar to you. African countries were the first to use mobile phones to do cash transfers, right? Fintech, M-Pesa, we were using M-Pesa in Uganda and Kenya in 2006, 7, 8. It's only the last 4 or 5 years I've been able to use my phone to transfer money here in the United States. So, the fact that we are living in a flatter world in terms of technology diffusion will actually help us catch up, and that's exactly what it has done over the last 30 years. I've made many of these points, so I will go straight to the second proposition, which is the impact of exogenous shocks in recent years. I don't need to tell you what COVID has done, what COVID did in terms of impacting economic outcomes in the region, as it has in advanced countries, the cost of living crisis that followed COVID, and of course, what we're seeing going on right now also, which is yet another significant adverse shocks adverse shock that's impacting people. And again, you can measure this both in the macroeconomic aggregates, but what's happening to people's livelihoods. Again, last week I was in the region, and it was really heart-wrenching to see, miles and miles and miles of queues for gas. Hundreds of people milling, waiting for taxis to get them home. Transport costs as it is are very high, and this of course is going to amplify that. I hate to think about how many job losses it's going to entail, or people that are unable to make appointments to the doctors, to other important events. And of course, I came back, and the war has barely had an effect here in people's lives here in the US. So I just want to make the point that we're very cognizant of just how much dislocation it's causing right now also. And this is all exogenous. These are all exogenous events and are happening despite much effort that countries have been making in recent years to improve economic outcomes. But perhaps, the thing that strikes me about what has happened in recent years about this, brutal cocktail of shocks is what I think it also marks is just a world that's fundamentally shifted and an economic order that's fundamentally shifted relative to the preceding 35 years. If you could go forward to the chart on clarification. The totality of all of these shocks, at least the way I see them from my vantage point, has meant that there's this big shift in the rules of the game facing developing countries, particularly in the region. I think the first one is that we're shifting to a period where external capital flows, particularly concessional flows, are going to be much, much more limited going forward than they have been in the past. So aid flows, which have been a very important supporter of development progress in the region over the last 25, 30 years, I don't think are going to be as forthcoming going forward. So I think this is going to be a very important source of pressure on many countries' budgets. Second, what we are seeing also is that, in the past, until about 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was evident that aid was declining, and the message from many advanced country policymakers was, trade, not aid. But of course, what we are seeing right now is an environment that's very, very problematic for export-led development. We've seen the tariffs that were imposed last year, but there's a lot of volatility in the global economic order, disruptions to shipping flows, etc., which raised, to my mind, a big question about whether this export-led engine for development, for progress, is one that African countries use much as Asian countries had in the past. And then the third one, I think, is the frequency of supply shocks. This early, perhaps the biggest manifestation of this was during COVID, of course, when everything got shut down. And you remember the challenge many of our countries had in securing personal protection devices for COVID, masks, etc., but also medicine, including the vaccines. It was incredibly difficult for African countries to get supply of those goods. Now it's manifesting itself in, of course, shortage of fuel. But I think, another supply shock, and those are kind of significant enough, but another supply shock that is happening, but we're not kind of focusing enough on, is the fact that right now, if you look at what's happening to imports from China, could move the slides, a couple more slides. Next one. It's not as legible here, but if you look at the chart on the right, what's happening is, as a result of Chinese goods not being sold in the US and other markets, there's actually a lot of trade diversion happening, including to Africa. This is fantastic for consumers, but for producers, for manufacturers who are trying to make a profit and expand operations, this is a huge challenge. So the point I want to make is that the international trading environment, the scale of financial flows, the price at which these financial flows are happening, and in general also the competitive environment that African countries are facing has all shifted tremendously, and it's something that we have to factor in our economic growth models and as we're thinking about the coming years and calibrating policies accordingly. On to my last proposition, which is, I remain extremely optimistic about the continent's prospects in future. We'll have a lot of tailwind coming from the demographic dividend, which is, beginning to unfold in the region. Broadly speaking, this shift from a very high dependency ratio. A lot of the population in most countries in the region is actually very young people who are not in the working age population. But in the coming years, this is going to shift to one where the majority of the population will be in working age group. And to my mind, if you could go to the next slide, please. To my mind, this is one of the most important geopolitical, geoeconomic developments that's taking place, and not enough attention is being paid to, because the shift to Africa being the population dynamics that are unfolding there are happening even as in the rest of the world we are seeing a lot of aging. So by 2030, by 2035 at the latest, we are going to be seeing that 1 out of every 2 new entrants into the global labor market are going to be coming from sub-Saharan Africa. 1 out of every 2. Okay, so any economic activity that requires labor input is going to require African labor input. And this chart on the right basically shows the inflection point. The blue is the rest of the world, the red is sub-Saharan Africa, and you see how much working age population growth has been a major driver of global economic activity around the world. And by 2030-35, it will be declining, and it will be sub-Saharan Africa that will be maintaining global population levels, but importantly, working age population levels at their current level globally. I think this is a huge fundamental shift. And for the region, I think it means a lot of tailwind, as I said. It will create a lot of demand for investment, for consumption goods. It's all very important. But historically, what we've seen is that countries going through this demographic transition, while they all tend to become richer, some have increased per capita income many-fold, 13, 14, 15 times, as was the case in China, some other APEC countries. But others, Latin America is a good example, the increase in per capita income between the start of the transition and when the transition plateaus has been much more modest, say doubling. So the key question, I think, for all Africans to worry about, to think about and try and address is how to make sure that we're closer to the China outcome, that we make good use of this demographic dividend and avoid being worse off, or at least not as well off as we could be at the end of this demographic transition when it plays out in the latter part of the 20th century. Almost exactly because it involves the future, I have no answer as to what is needed explicitly to make sure that the demographic dividend is one we realize. It's going to differ from country to country. It's going to be really important to fine-tune things also. There's no single approach that's going to be important. And of course, first and foremost, it's important for African policymakers to come up with. But there's one thing that I do know that will be really bad, and what we've seen as having been a detracting factor in recent years, which is self-inflicted harm. And just to give an example of a couple, one is, I think, fiscal deficits that have been very large, which have led to financing challenges, led to runaway inflation, money printing. That has actually detracted from helping advance development progress. It's a difficult thing, of course, but still, we have to accept the reality that financing constraints are there, and it's not something that you can wish away. So avoiding self-inflicted harm like that is really important. Second, other cases where we know it's been harmful is overvaluation of exchange rates. Again, that's a small example of very harmful policies. The number of times I've gone to countries where policymakers have said that we really need jobs for the young, really need jobs. That's a key overriding factor, absolutely. But at the same time, they overvalue the exchange rate. And so what happens is that, you cannot have any labor-intensive development, any labor-intensive growth when you're overvaluing the exchange rate and making yourself uncompetitive, when you're making your farm exports uncompetitive, when you're making your manufacturing exports uncompetitive. How do you create jobs in that environment if you're overvaluing your exchange rate? So again, avoiding these self-inflicted harms is going to be important. Of course, this also applies to many other areas of life, education policy, making sure, education attendance, education outcomes are important. I'm focusing here on what I know as a macroeconomist. So, but again, as I said, I remain extremely optimistic. It's really just a matter of making sure that we have policies that look after people's interests and avoiding self-inflicted harm for the future. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Haile Maleko Taspa. I'm working for Center for International Private Enterprise. It's a non-profit organization. I'm a country manager for Ethiopia. Good to see you, Dr. Abebe. It's wonderful, the three propositions. I completely agree with the first two, but just please help me to understand the third one in terms of demography dividends. As you know, one of the challenges we are having in Africa, especially in my home country, your home country, Ethiopia, is the population. We cannot create jobs. So the fast growth of population becomes a challenge in terms of migration, international migration. Many young people are crossing the Red Sea, Mediterranean, and many thousands of people are dying. And the other issue is also environmental degradation. Also, the population by itself, especially the young without job, becomes a source of instability and political crisis, and all kinds of conflicts we are having in the region, especially in the Horn of Africa and Sudan, Ethiopia. So please just give us more light to understand the demographic dividends versus all the challenges we are witnessing in everyday life in the region. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Does this work?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Rugiatou Diallo. I am an economic research officer for the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation. We have an office in Washington, D.C. that focuses on the IMF and the World Bank. I just want to complicate a little bit your three developments, propositions, and ask questions about the role of IMF on each of them. The first, about making development progress, you might be aware that the World Bank Human Capital team says that average basic skills levels have declined in low-income countries in the past 20 years. So even though we've had an increase in access, we see kind of a decline in quality. And so given the demographic prospects on the continent, these questions about access to basic skill and training is very important. And it's really hard for us not to separate that from the fact that in the past couple of decades, we've seen constant cutting of public wage bills, declining of the capacity of the public sector to provide quality public services. So if you can speak a little bit about the role of the IMF there in terms of how to manage financing of public services to ensure that as we increase access, we increase quality as well. The second, about the exogenous developments, Yes, the continent is particularly sensitive to exogenous shocks because of the structure of the economies. Export-led growth doesn't take us as far as we need to, and it does not translate into jobs. We've seen a jobless growth on the continent early in the 21st century, and the latest IMF paper on low-income countries has this really interesting graph on FDI destination, the destination FDI, with respect to job creation and R&D intensity. And so when we see which sectors receive FDI, most of them, like mining, electricity generation, are sectors that have very low job creation and very low R&D intensity. So how do we think about, and this is consistent with the more than $1 trillion US dollars a year that come out of the continent in terms of profit from private capital. So how do we change that? How do we rethink where the money is going, where the FDI is going, to really change the structure of our economies? And then the last one, I think it's really important to focus on what our governments can do to take advantage of what you call the African century. But we have to remind ourselves that we live in a system around, and so when it comes around financial mechanisms, and so when it comes to taxation and debt mechanisms, how do we work on those at the international level, and what is the IMF multilateral surveillance doing to make sure that those financing constraints, right, can be lifted? Because there's only so much we can do when we live in a continent where debt service interest rates are so high, when we have tax system that an international tax system that allows people to evade, to avoid taxes, etc. So, thank you.
Thank you. Let Dr. Selassie answer those questions, and the lady is actually ahead of one of the panels that we have. But please.
Thank you. So just on the first question about demographics, I mean, it's an incredibly complex issue, of course, as you all know, population growth, etc. But look, what I explained is kind of, the fundamental economic forces that we've seen unfolding in country after country after country. Does it not have social consequences, etc.? Absolutely. Does it not pose challenge? Absolutely. But the key is it's a little bit like I have a young boy who's now 18, and at one point he was growing so fast it felt like so unsustainable, and because we're having to buy him clothes every 3-4 months, his feet were growing every few months, and I felt like tying him down because just like I felt so it's a little bit like that. Yes, it poses a challenge, but but it's something that you need to recognize that it will stop at some point, and the key is how to manage it when that is happening. And I'm talking about not just his physical development, but also mental development and other things. So it's a transition. That's exactly why we call it that. Second, I'm not sure kind of historically, if you look back, that many of the many of the points that you said have actually been have unfolded the way that you say that they have unfolded historically. If you look at, yes, in some cases, has population pressure been a source of pressure on economics, etc., and led to bad outcomes? Yes, absolutely. I mean, we see this in the Sahel a little bit, right? This fight between pastoralists, etc. But what if we had, better mechanisms to manage that? What if we had more, democratic voice and accountability to manage that? Maybe the outcome would be different. So I don't take it, linearly that more population growth means automatically it will lead to more conflict. So I think, and it's going to be country specific, it's going to be within countries, time specific. So it's about how to manage this, and above all, invest in the young to make sure that we have a more educated workforce that are going to be more creative, that are going to be more entrepreneurial. So I don't want to not acknowledge the challenge, absolutely, but so is everything in a way. Second, on education, which of course is a cross-cutting thing. I think, I was a little bit privy to some of these discussions that were taking place in my country 30, 35 years ago. Yeah? We had a system which was extremely focused on a narrow group of the population, often in urban areas, and educating them to a really incredible level. I think that was true for many countries 30, 40 years ago. And, there was a government change, the new government that came said, no, our priority is going to be, mass education. And they knew, of course, this meant that every incremental resource was going to create a classroom rather than going to upgrade facilities in the universities or the, magnet schools. I remember being attacked by friends that had gone to, some of these magnet schools. But, I have to say this is for countries, for policymakers to define where the additional resource goes to pursue, do you want mass literacy or, but resources are constrained and decisions have to be made. Has the IMF World Bank played a role in limiting education budgets? I think, honestly, I've been working there 30 years, and I can tell you that a lot of the discussion that we have is more about the spending envelope, and rarely, certainly at the IMF level, do we go down and say like the education should be this, etc. It's about the aggregate envelope, what's financeable, what's sustainable, given the financing challenges that you have. And many of these decisions, whether to allocate to education versus military versus health, are deeply domestic and political decisions that are taken by countries. I don't want to say that we've not made mistakes or not been involved in areas where some squeeze has happened, but 90% of the time we provide financing to limit the amount of contraction that would otherwise happen. Second, we also ask that countries spend more in priority areas like health, education, as much as possible. Lastly, also, again, just in general, tone-wise, I think, my old boss used to say that this is not your grandmother's IMF. And honestly, certainly since I joined in '94, I have not seen, been privy to discussions where we are dictating these things, and countries have a lot more autonomy than seems the way. FDI, job creation, why does all the investment go to mining and other sectors? Just a general point on FDI, we fetishize it. I think that's one of the big problems also, including in my institution, like FDI. But if you actually look for most countries, FDI does not account more than 10-15% of total investment. To me, the bigger telling factor about whether a country is going to grow fast or not is actually whether domestic investment is increasing. If your own population is not investing, if the guy that's, making popcorn machine around the corner is not expanding to, have a bigger garage, a bigger manufacturing sector, it's a sign that policies are not working for your people. So, and I think our policymakers, we're too often kind of going after these big FDI and creating kind of exactly the challenges that you noted, including, tax incentives, etc. I think that's much more harmful than actually fostering an environment for domestic investors to take off. So, this warpedness that you see of investment flowing to FDI comes from exactly our fetishizing these big firms that are coming and extracting money quickly and paying taxes. And then lastly, I hear a lot about, global architecture is, financial architecture is not fair to Africa, etc. Absolutely. But I don't think the global football architecture is fair to Africa and many other things. But I think we have to. No, I think again, I hate this victim mentality. I think we have to work hard at just making sure things are in our favor. I don't think it helps when we pile up a lot of debt to begin with. There are difficult internal resources, difficult as they are. Using internal resources for development is much healthier for us than relying on external financing. So I think we also have to look a little bit more inward, and rather than kind of this woe is me attitude. It's not to detract from the fact that there are problems in the global financial system that absolutely. And we do as an institution. Honestly, we spend so much time, including like this week, flagging all of the problems that policies in advanced countries are causing developing countries, and doing our best to defray those things. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.